Musings, and I had the time of my life. And I have to say, since I first got involved with Black Cat Radio, I've been having the time of my life ever since, principally because we've got some great listeners out there, but also because I get to meet lots of great people. And the latest of those I hadn't met until this morning, but I feel like we've known one another for quite a long time because we've had a chat this morning, we've been out for a coffee, and live in the studio with me is Irena Ruby. Good morning, Irena. How are you?
Good morning, Steve. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you sent an email into Black Cat Radio and it caught my attention. I thought, oh, Irena might be a good guest for your voice. So here we are, live in the studio. First and foremost, tell us a little bit about your upbringing, where you're from, and ultimately how you ended up moving to London in the first place.
Oh, well, that's quite a long story, so we might be here for a while. I grew up in the Netherlands and I studied law there. And then after my degree, I traveled for years. I took a year out, then met my partner in Australia, which is quite a romantic story. We had 3 dates in 3 different continents. I moved to London afterwards to be with him. And I've been in England ever since. And I live in Cambridgeshire now.
Here in St Neots?
Here in St Neots.
In Amesbury. How did you find travelling abroad? Because this is something I've got to say, we've been talking about my son Ben, who got married on this day last week, but he and his friend James took a year out and went to Australia. And it happened about 7 or 8 months after my mum died, and I felt guilty of the fact I'd never cried when my mum died, but when Ben went to Australia I cried like a baby. All the emotion came out, and I think part of it was that I never made the step to do what Ben did at his age and travel. What made you want to travel?
I always wanted to travel, and I'd still like to travel now, see more of the world, because it's such. I think it changes you when you see places and when you go to places. And I was going to travel with a friend, and we left together to go to Thailand. She got really homesick, so she actually left after 3 or 4 weeks, went back home, and then I traveled for the rest of the year by myself, which was quite a scary thing to do. But yeah, I'm really glad that I did it, and I never even thought about going back home when she went back. I just wanted to carry on and travel by myself. And when you travel by yourself, as a woman, I think a lot of people warn you, but actually you meet so many, you're much more open to meeting people, and you have to, act a bit sensibly, but it's, it was a wonderful experience. Quite a long time ago now.
You might say that. So you got to London, but you weren't working in art at the time, and I think this is very interesting because lots of people pursue one career and then decide this isn't really what I desperately in my heart of hearts want to do. What were you doing in London?
I studied law during my degree, which is very different from art. And I moved to London and I realized that law in the Netherlands is very different from English law. So I found a job in insurance, and I worked in the financial industry in a very corporate environment in insurance for 8 years. Before I became an artist.
8 years in insurance. Was it challenging, or was it the thing that you thought, I don't really want to do this? It's paying the bills at the moment, but I really want to pursue something else.
A little bit all of those things. It was a really interesting place to be in. Very vibrant, fast-paced. I had a lot of travel for work, a lot of responsibilities. I worked with quite high-profile clients. So then there was like dinners and going out, and it was a very shiny way of life, which I learned a lot from, and I met a lot of wonderful people there. But at some point, I just realized that wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, and being in a really corporate environment and sitting behind a computer all day in an office just wasn't for me. There's a bit of a story about how I came to that decision as well. But I just realized that I wanted some change, and I saved up money, and then I left.
You mentioned those wonderful people. Are you in touch with any of them still?
Well, quite a few. Yeah.
And did they say, Irena, you're leaving the safety of the corporate world to go and work in art? Are you sure?
I don't think anyone has ever said it to me. I'm sure they thought that. But because I'm usually quite confident in my decisions. So by the time I told people, I think they realized that this was something I really wanted to do. So no one's ever questioned me about. Same when I moved to England, everyone's like, okay, this is what she's doing. we'll trust that that's going to be okay. But yeah, I'm sure people did have a little bit of doubt in the background where they're like, well, we'll see how this works out in the long run.
Well, people may not have asked it in the past, but we're asking it this morning. Irena Ruby is my guest on Your Voice, and we'll catch up to find out exactly how she ended up in Amesbury very soon. This is Your Voice.
This is Your Voice. Weekday mornings from 11 on Black Cat Radio.
1 and 1. It's Black Cat Radio's Your Voice show with Ste Greenall this Friday. It's live in the studio, and my guest is Irena Ruby. Now, Irena, you've been telling me about how you gave up a career in the law to pursue your love of art. I want to go back in a moment or two about when you first discovered the love of art, but tell me, if you will, the journey from London to St Neots. How did that all come about?
Well, I have been in St Neots now for almost 4 years. Almost exactly to the date, 4 years. And I really love it here. I thought I would really miss London because St Neots is the smallest place I've ever lived in.
Really?
I've always been in big cities. But yeah, I love it. And I live with my partner, and we lived in London at the time, and this was during lockdown, and we just realized how much we missed having more green around us and more green spaces, and that the best thing about the place where we lived in London at the time was how easy it was to leave the city. And we thought, that's not a good enough reason to be in London. So we started looking. We had some friends living here, and then quite quickly come to the decision to move to St Neots.
So friends persuaded you to come here?
Partly,
And you stayed with them, and you thought, this is a nice place.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we stayed with them for a night, went for a run around town, and I just thought this seems like a really lovely place to live. So, and we're a bit spontaneous people, so we visited 2 houses and we bought the first one, and that was it.
What's the best thing about St Neots?
The community. I've made so many friends here. Like, it's so much easier to talk to people than it is in London. Everyone interacts with each other. People say hello to each other on the street. So it sounds like a proper city person coming. I love it.
Now, I want to go back, if I may, because on your website, and we'll give a little bit of a plug, by the way, because if anyone listening right now, you really need to take a look at Irena's website, because it's called makingsandmusings.com. And I'll post that link later on the Febs page for the Full English Breakfast Show, which is my other show, of course, but we'll put it on Black Cat Radio's media as well. But you say on the website how your outlook on art changed after you lost your grandmother. Tell us a little bit about that. How close were you to her, and what was the relationship, and how did you develop the art? This is quite an emotional story for me, because this is really how Makings and Musings started. And I was very close to my grandmother, to all my grandparents. To my grandmother, I was with her when she passed away. I held her hand. I was there with my sister and my mum and my aunt, all sitting around her, and I held her hand while she passed away. And it's just, it brings back a lot of memories. My grandmother was an artist, and she painted a lot, and her whole house was full of artwork. She made a lot of ceramics as well, but a lot of paintings. And after she passed, I took all her art materials home, and I started to use that paint and those brushes. And whilst I painted, I realized that my grief was getting less, and that I felt really close to her. And from that moment on, I never stopped painting. And so that was in 2018, and in 2019 I left my job and became a full-time artist. Had you painted before?
I was quite creative as a kid, so I painted a lot as a kid. I applied to art school, to university, twice, and got rejected twice. And then I decided, well, apparently art is not for me, and I'm going to do law. And then the whole circle has come around, and now I'm an artist. So it's funny how life can take you sometimes.
Absolutely. Our guest on Your Voice this morning, Irena Ruby, who now lives in Amesbury, which is a lot smaller than Melbourne or London or indeed Rotterdam, which we're going to play in a moment or two. Tell me about Rotterdam.
I'll tell you about Rotterdam.
Yeah.
So this is where...
I've never been, so I don't know anything about it. I've been to Amsterdam, but never been to Rotterdam.
Rotterdam is an interesting city because it is quite a working class city, traditionally, because of the harbour. Actually, my first job ever was in the harbour of Rotterdam. I worked on the desk stamping papers and helping people with their cargo, and people coming and collecting containers and stuff like that. But another story. So Rotterdam is an interesting mix of working class people and really modern buildings and very fast pace. And it's the place where I grew up. It's a very diverse city.
musically, let's go there with the beautiful South. 11:35, good morning. If you've just joined us on Your Voice, you're missing a fascinating conversation that I'm having this morning with Irena Ruby, who moved to this country, worked in the insurance industry in London, and then gave it all up to pursue a career in art. Irena, just tell me a little bit more about the step from inheriting from your grandmother all of her paintbrushes, I guess, and did she paint in oils or did she use watercolours?
Everything, oils, watercolors. I have a whole box of pencils that she used. I have a whole box with only red pencils. I have no idea why she had this, but I still keep it. And when I use them, I think of her all the time.
You'll never give these up, will you?
Absolutely not.
In fact, I suspect if you come to use the red pencils and you're down to one, you'll probably say to yourself, "I'm never going to use that one because that's my what was your grandmother's name?"
Blanche.
And when you were talking about her earlier on, I could see the emotion in your eyes, but I sense that when you start to do a brand new painting, she's right there with you.
Absolutely. I think she'd be very proud of me. She was a very feisty woman. So I think she would have liked the fact that I run my own business now as well.
I bet she'd have liked the fact you were on the radio too. There's a question on your website I'm looking at right now. It says, "What is Makings and Musings?" So answer that question for me. What is it?
Makings and Musings, so that's my business name, Makings and Musings, is foremost an art community. And that is in a lot of different shapes. So I host an online community where people are members of, and we paint and we draw together every week. So I teach people who are new to art, who have not done art for many years. Most people have done some art as a kid, then forgot about it. Life takes over and they want to come back to it. So I teach people to come back to art and make art part of their daily lives through sketchbooking and painting and drawing. And I also have a number of online courses that I teach. So for people who cannot tune in sort of on a regular basis on Zoom, they can do a course in their own time. And I also teach in-person classes, so mostly in Cambridge at the moment, and sometimes for groups. So I have to go to London, or I went to Margate the other day to teach a group there. So I'm sort of all over the country to teach groups of art classes.
How do you get to teach in Margate? It's quite a while, a little way away. Is it all word of mouth, or does it come through the community you've got online?
Both. Yeah, a lot of it is word of mouth. I think a lot of it, I just put myself, I go to a lot of places and then I talk to people about what I do, and then you never know who you run into and what they do. So I spoke to a person in the airport once who turned out to be a chef, and we had a whole conversation, and then it turned out he wanted a book illustrated, and then I ended up illustrating that book. So you never know where work comes from. And a lot of it is social media as well. So I'm quite active on Instagram. I vlog and I share things about my life and behind the scenes of the business. So people see that, and then they know where to find me as well.
If someone were to look at your work and try to define it, what would you be pleased if they said, "Your work reminds me of"? What would it be?
Not necessarily if it reminds me of a person or a famous artist, but if it sort of evokes an emotion or if it brings them joy. That's what I really want. My art is not deeply political. I make a lot of art about healthcare issues, and I want to evoke an emotion with that, and also make complicated topics understandable for people. So, for example, I illustrated a children's book about a premature born baby, which was a very sensitive topic, and this child had to go through lots of health interventions, and for people to read that, and then in a respectful way, fairly light-hearted, but still evoke the emotions that are important. So that's the type of things I do.
So how helpful is art in people's mental well-being?
Massively. Like it's such a big influence on people's mental health to do arts and crafts. And actually, there's a study that came out about 2-3 weeks ago in Cambridge, published by Frontiers Health, and it is all about how arts and crafts influence our mental health and our well-being, and how making arts and crafts helps us form our identity more and our sense of self-worth more than our job does, our paid jobs, our careers. And I think that's such a big thing, because we live in a society where having a job is such a big part of our identity, and a lot of people identify themselves by their jobs, but actually making arts and crafts can be more important to you than the job that you do.
Perhaps we can talk about that in a moment or two. Irena Ruby, my guest on Your Voice this morning. You're listening to Black Cat Radio from St Neots.
Your Voice is sponsored.
This is Your Voice with Ste Greenall on Black Cat Radio.
And my guest in the studio this morning, because we're doing it live on Your Voice, is Irena Ruby. Now, Irena, we touched on a moment or two ago the study that's been taking place in Anglia Ruskin University, released by Frontiers in Public Health, confirming what many people have believed for a long time, that engaging in arts and craft can enhance life satisfaction and overall well-being. Would you go along with that?
Absolutely. Of course, it's something that I already knew, but it's really lovely to see this actually confirmed in the studies. And I think it is a really good opportunity to open up that conversation again. And people can sometimes be a bit insecure about making art, because a lot of people think they are not creative. But in reality, everyone is creative and everyone can learn arts or crafts or make things with their own hands. And hopefully the studies is a prompt for people to pick up that paintbrush or try, some watercolors or sketch outdoors or try something new, because it is so good for you, and it can give you so much satisfaction to do that.
You get the satisfaction yourself. How much satisfaction can you get from seeing someone who comes along to one of your classes, maybe like me, who's only ever used their voice and a mouse or a pen to create things, to pick up a brush or to pick up a piece of clay to model something, and then when you see what they achieve, there must be a great sense of well-being for you.
Oh, I love it. It's the reason why I do what I do, why I do my classes. I absolutely love it when people, and there's people who've been with me for 4 or 5 years, painting with me every single week. And I have seen them go from being very insecure, very conscious of what they made and not wanting to show it to the world, to making like complete paintings and being proud of it and then sharing it on social media and being proud of what they share, and seeing people flourish like that and building confidence is really lovely. And I think they carry on that confidence in other parts of their lives as well, because when you have that sense of like, oh, I've made something, then you can carry that on for the rest of your day. And yeah, it's wonderful to see.
I mentioned to you earlier on a painting that I particularly liked and still do, which my brother's then father-in-law did for him, which was a copy of Card Players by Cézanne, and I still have it at home and still get a lot of pleasure from looking at it. Is there a particular painting, if you think back over the course of your life, that you think, oh, that is just amazing, I wished I'd painted that? Oh. Or are there many?
There are many, yeah, there are so many. I love going. The fact that here in England you can go to the museums and most of them are free and you can just look at the art over and over. I used to live almost next to the Tate Modern and I used to go in every week and have a look at the artwork. But I think my favorite artist of all time, so maybe not the favorite painting, but the favorite artist of all time is Frida Kahlo. I think she's just an absolute wonderful, inspiring artist. And her life story, if you don't know Frida Kahlo, look her up. She's absolutely...
I know nothing about her. Tell our listeners why they should look up Frida Kahlo.
Frida Kahlo struggled her whole life with disability, and she lived at the same time, sort of early 1900s, when for a woman to make art and to make a living from art, and she married another painter, Diego, who is very famous in Mexico, and Frida just became way more famous than him, and her artwork is just full of, she basically shares the journey of her own pain and her own struggles with disability and her own struggles with infertility, and it's just really they're not necessarily the paintings that you'd hang on the wall because they're quite intense, but it's just really wonderful stories behind them.
I'd be very surprised, although it could well be the case, if there's someone who works in insurance or law or accountancy or whatever else listening right now who's thinking, do you know what, I think I want to make the step that Irena has. What would you say to them? And do you ever encounter anyone like that you've actually helped them to make that step?
I have. I do a little bit of mentoring for people sometimes. I think you don't immediately have to quit your job. you can just start with small steps. Start painting and drawing every day. Just small paintings, small drawings, and build that out, or whatever it is that you want to do. But yeah, make sure you start, because if you wait for everything to be perfect before you start, then that moment is never going to happen. And you can start as a side hustle. Open a little online shop and start selling your prints, or start illustrating some commissions for people and put your art out there. And it's like the small steps that bring like big results in the long run. Where you can't wait to be discovered and be famous. It's the small steps that count. So start somewhere, and then slowly you'll get to that point that you envisioned.
I did ask if there was a particular piece of music you'd like to play, and you've selected one, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to introduce it. But first of all, tell us why you picked it.
Well, there's only one song that I could really pick, and that is Ruby by the Kaiser Chiefs. And it's basically about me. I always hear my own name when I play it, and it's one of my favorite musicians. So I hear Irene Ruby, Ruby, Ruby. So yeah, that's why.
Well, our listeners are going to hear it as well right now.